me turn my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, it's still Financial Literacy Month. It's April. We're doing our Tuesday episodes are based around financial literacy and trying to take it from a bit of a different approach than the norm. I'm really excited about today's guest. We've got Sol from Wealth Para Todos, a really amazing coach, and we'll get into her whole background. I think it's super relatable and humble beginnings. And also, you know, her sort of approach to building wealth and preparing for the future, she takes it from a self-care perspective, which I think is amazing and unorthodox in general and counter to so much of the content that we see on social media in today's day and age. And that's sort of what I guess my greater goal has been this month, is to not feed more and of the same nonsense and regurgitate this toxic finance bro attitude that is the norm around financial literacy. But how do we humanize it? How do we produce happy human beings rather than just wealthy ones, right? How do we produce happy, wealthy human beings rather than just financially successful ones? And I love sort of the approach. I don't want to give away too much, you know, from the conversation, but again, the idea that we are trying to build wealth and build for the future as a means of taking care of ourselves and improving our lives, not just financially, but, you know, as just human beings in general. And that's where this sort of self-care approach, I think, is so crucial, because it's one thing to be wealthy, it's another to be happy, right? And I think too often we combine the two or assume that the two go together. And I think, as we've seen with so many wealthy people who go off and do crazy shit, just because they're rich doesn't mean they're actually healthy or happy at the end of the day. And that was actually a Freudian slip. I meant to say it doesn't mean they're happy, but also doesn't mean they're healthy, right? Your mental health is so crucial to being physically healthy as well. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation with Soledad, because I think it's a much needed balance of the two that is not spoken about quite enough. So enough for me. Let's just get into this conversation, and we'll do it as a part of our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. My guest today is the founder and CEO of the financial education community named Wealth Para Todos, Rita-Soledad Fernández Paulino. How you feeling?
I'm feeling so good. I'm excited to be here to talk dinero and self-care with you.
Yes, I'm very excited. I randomly, I think from ChatGPT was a recommendation of Wealth Para Todos. Yeah, so as I was doing research for Financial Literacy Month, your brand popped up. So I'm very excited. Yes. So whatever, I don't know how it's finding you, but something's working, right? Whatever it is you're doing is working.
That's good. Good to know. Thanks for letting me know.
Of course, yeah. So I mean, I'm kind of trying to tackle Financial Literacy Month from a bit of a different perspective than sort of the norm, cookie cutter, and even from, I think, some of the more toxic mindsets behind like just get rich quick schemes almost, you know. And I think I really gravitated towards your content and your philosophy and your messaging. Because you're sort of, I don't want to say practical because that feels almost limiting, but it's almost real life, like tangible ways of building wealth and putting yourself in a position to financially be in a place that you want to be and that is ideal for you. And it starts with the personal attachment of you being a former public school teacher. I'm the son of a former public school teacher myself. So I know the struggle. I know the grind. I know that you guys are overworked and drastically underpaid. And I find that to be so fascinating that you've kind of moved into this place of where you talk about the idea that your husband and you are on track to retire at the age of 45, and that's a dream for
47.
so
Well,
many people.
47 for me, 45 for him.
Okay, but either way, a dream come true for many people. I know if my mom had the opportunity to retire at that age, she probably would have been quick to take it, right? But I want to kind of start, I guess, at that point right there, right? Because we talk about wealth, we talk about finances, and everybody thinks about the most extreme cases of sort of becoming some multi-billionaire and, investing in some stock and some crypto thing or whatever it might be. And there are far more sort of practical and ideal ways of going about it. I'm curious for you, starting there from that point of being a teacher, how do we get to this place where you are putting yourself on a financial track that so many people dream about?
Yeah, so in 2019, I got sick. I was so sick that I had to take a medical leave and I relied on disability checks. At that time, my husband had his own company and he had to shut it down. So we
Wow.
had two kids living in LA. The only income that we knew was going to come in were my disability checks. And I felt so financially vulnerable. And I didn't grow up like with a lot of money. I grew up, house poor, living in LA. Like we had a house, but my mom struggled in terms of being able to maintain it. And yet I felt so financially scared and nervous during that time of my life. So I was 32 years old and I started reading personal finance books while I was bedridden. I was so sick that I was taking steroid shots because the inflammation was in my lungs and it was hard for me to breathe. So it was like bottom. It was hard times. And even I remember going to the doctors and still not wanting to take time off because I had my students and the state exams were coming around. And I was like, no, I can't leave them with a substitute for the last few months of school. It was a challenging time where even then, like my self-care practices were non-existent.
Sure.
And during that time, I started reading personal finance books and I was reading a lot of them and they just kind of all said the same thing. And I had this very limiting belief that someone with my lived experiences wouldn't be able to build financial security. I would read these books and instead of being like, oh, let me try that, I would be like, well, they don't live in a high cost living area. Well, they don't have two kids. Well, they're not, they're entrepreneurs. I'm not an entrepreneur and I could never be an entrepreneur. I'm so busy as a teacher, So I had a lot of beliefs that it couldn't happen to me. And then on social media, I started to find personal finance content creators who did look like me, who were Latinas, who had grown up also with humble beginnings, and they were talking about paying off lots of student loan debt, how they were investing in the stock market. And I was like, oh, wait, now I can't keep my same limiting belief that it doesn't apply to me. Now it was a mirror of like, okay, are you going to continue to say, I can't do this because of all the things, or are you going to try? Yeah. And I said, you know what? I'm only 32. Let's try. Let's just see. And it has just become one thing after the other. I mean, we paid off our student loan debt before I turned 33, which was around $23,500 after 10 years of payments. Okay. That's still how much we had left. Then we saved a 6-month emergency fund, which was $30,000. I learned how to invest in the stock market. And I'm talking about simple, not like trading stocks, everybody, just like simple investing for retirement, and learned to like max out our Roth IRAs. Then our employer retirement accounts, worked on increasing our income dramatically so that we had the extra cash flow to continue to build our financial security. So that's where we are now. And we're just beautiful. Do things poco a poco.
Yeah, little by little. Exactly. Well, that's what I love that because, again, social media is amazing, but we're also in this time period of everybody's chasing like the sexy win, like the win that looks amazing on social media, right? But like maxing out your Roth IRA isn't very sexy to post on social media, right? So everybody's chasing whatever that big win is that they can show off. And really the sustainable way to build wealth is little by little, in your own words there. And I guess let's kind of start at the beginning, because I love you're tapping into something I think so many of us struggle with is those limiting beliefs, right? Specifically from our communities where I think, we are just products of people who struggled, or to your point of being house rich, that was even just like achieving the dream. Even though you are, struggling and mentally stretching yourself and burning out just to maintain that house and to have it, it's still, that's the win, right? That's sort of the ultimate goal a lot of times. Or like I reference this a lot in, growing up. My father felt like anybody who was wildly successful must have been born into money, right? They must have had some sort of crazy connection. And again, that's a limiting belief that I had to shed, that I inherited from him. So I'm curious for you, you're looking yourself in the mirror, right? The excuses that you gave yourself are no longer holding up because you're being exposed to all these people who are doing these things that you keep telling yourself you can't do. What were the first steps then that you kind of took, the little small steps to begin to dip your toe in these waters?
Great question. And I just want to say this. I grew up house poor. At this time, I didn't even have a house. I was a renter.
Mm,
I didn't buy a house until later after I had learned, after we both had 100K invested in our retirement accounts,
wow.
which was also very against the grain because we had been raised like, well, not my husband, me. I had been raised like, you buy a house, that's financial security. You buy a
Of
house and
course.
focus on doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of like limiting beliefs, one of the thoughts that I really struggled with, or one of even the first steps that I had to learn to do was learn to budget. And so
Mm,
actually reviewing my finances, the money that was coming in and how the money was going out.
right.
And it was very hard for me to do that because I was constantly going over budget. And
Mm-hmm.
anytime I went over budget, I had the thought, el dinero se hizo para gastar. Money is meant to be spent.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I grew up hearing.
Yeah.
So there was like, it was kind of like, I went over budget, but that's okay because money's meant to be spent. But if
Right.
money's always being spent and you're not following your little budget, then you're not going to have the extra cash flow to send extra payments towards debt, to be able to save an emergency fund, to be able to max out a Roth IRA. And
Right.
so it took me 8 months to be able to create a budget and actually follow the budget. And
Mm,
it's because a lot of times I would just stop. I would quit and then I'd be like, I'm not good at this. Or, it's because I have ADHD or it's because I have dyscalculia. Oh, I hate numbers.
mm,
Even though I was a math major, I was still telling myself like, oh, I hate numbers when it came to my finances.
yeah. Well, what are like the practical? What do you have a practical budget formula? Because I think this is probably like ground level the most difficult thing that we all struggle with. Also because because we work so hard, right? It's easy, and it's also true. We deserve things, right, in this life, but at times you have to have a little bit of restraint as to when you pull the trigger on the things that you deserve, right? But that is something many of us, myself included, were not taught, right? We went on the vacation that we couldn't afford, right? And, stretched everything and came back broke, and everybody was miserable, for the next few months or whatever it was. But we just kept pushing and pushing, right? And when I say we, I mean like my family growing up, now that I have a better understanding. So I'm curious, what was like the formula that you found for budgeting that actually stuck, that actually worked for you at that point?
Well, one of the things I want to normalize is even at this stage of financial security, I still go over budget.
Mm,
The reason why we go over budget is because we just don't have our plan for our
yeah,
money. We didn't follow it. That's
right.
it. And it could be something so neutral. I think the biggest struggle that a lot of us have is we start to shame ourselves and we
Hmm.
start to be really mean to ourselves. So then it's like we don't even want to look at our
Right.
plan and review the budget over and over again.
Hmm.
The biggest thing that has helped me is that now when I look at my budget, when I create a spending plan and I'm unable to follow it, it's just numbers. It's
Mm,
just data. I'm not being mean to myself. Instead, I'm like, oh, okay, so I went over here. Like this literally happened this weekend.
yeah.
Literally this weekend, we went over and how much we spent at Whole Foods. We went over and how much we spent, but we went under how much we spent on Costco.
Hmm.
And so then we were just like, okay, so now we have a little bit of money that we could just kind of transfer over there. But then I was like, no, we still overspent because at my niece's birthday party, I said I was
Hmm.
only going to spend $100 and I spent more than 100. So
Hmm.
I know that this week we're operating like already at a negative place.
Mm,
So that means that next week, okay, we're going to have to like spend a little bit less. One thing that really helped me was looking at my spending on a weekly basis and stop looking at my spending just when I got paid.
mm,
That was a huge game changer. So now I'm creating a spending plan every week, reviewing my finances every single week, and then I can make little adjustments. And it's never something like, oh, it's too much. I've also
right.
traveled. and overspent. Again, I looked at that as feedback and allowed it to let me be a better saver for the next trip. I would collect data on how we spent what was the average amount of money spent on transportation, on our hotel or like housing, right? On our eating, on our activities, looked at that. And so then I got better about saving for that in the future. And when you do that, when you start having real data and you know like what your real spending is like, and you're not judgmental about it, you know, one thing about me is even when we were paying off our student loan debt, I still budgeted to eat out because there's no way we were going to cook every single meal.
Right.
Like, no, it wasn't going to happen. So I found my ways to still eat out, and it changed, right? Like when I was on my paying off my student loans and our income was a lot less, we were eating at like a place called Pollo Loco. It's like this chicken fast food place in LA, right? So there are ways that you could eat versus now we can order DoorDash and have the food delivered to us because we do have that extra cash flow. But it's still, the thing is that you're always going to overspend sometimes. It doesn't need to be like, oh, you're bad with money.
Right. I love what you just said about working sort of the cheat days, if you will, into your budget, because I think that is part of the problem. I've done this to myself where you go cold turkey, or like I've looked at my Uber Eats for like a month and I was like, there's no way in hell I should be eating this much Uber Eats. I need to start cooking. I need to start like, setting some time aside in the day to actually sit down and cook some meals to not be overspending like I am for each and every meal. But then what happens is you go too far and you like white knuckle it, and then you're just like miserable at the fact that you're not allowed to now go and enjoy some of those meals that you want to have, or just mix it up a little bit. So I love the idea of saying like we can budget in the little pleasantries of life. It doesn't mean you cut everything out. Life doesn't have to sort of be this sterile, miserable thing in order for you to get your finances in order. You just have to plan for them is sort of, I guess, what the approach you've taken and continue to take.
100%. And I call them proactive self-care expenses. And when I sit down with clients to review their budgets, the first thing we do is like, what are your proactive self-care expenses and things that you know that you want to spend money on because they add to your joy, to your resilience. And that's so important because part of the work that I do with my clients is also making sure that they increase their income. And if you're feeling deprived, if you're feeling like, cranky because you're not getting enough joy in your life, you're not going to have the capacity to focus on like ways to monetize your skills. You're just not going to have energy. So instead, we really focus on like, okay, what are your proactive self-care expenses? What are your fixed expenses, your variable expenses, minimum debt payment? Do we have extra cash flow? How can we work on increasing your extra cash flow? Poco a poco, little by little, because anything that is very like cold turkey or thinking about it as a cheat day, it's not sustainable. And instead, it just keeps doing this cycle where it's like a shame cycle versus a wealth cycle.
Yeah, and that mental part of it is obviously incredibly important and not spoken about, I think, as often as it needs to be, right? So I love that we're kind of starting with the idea of budgeting. If we were to kind of create a blueprint, right, for Latinos, for under, served communities, those who didn't grow up with a lot of money, extra and have had to work their ass off their entire life just to get by, essentially, what is kind of the step-by-step blueprint, if you will, that you would kind of create for them to improve their finances and then essentially shift into having their financial goals met and living the type of lifestyle that they personally want to live?
Yes. Okay. Well, first things first, everyone needs to understand that there's levels to financial security. And so I teach financial security as like 10 different stages, with the 10th stage being your work optional. You're working because you want to, not because you have to. And the first stage being that you can cover all of your expenses with debt, that you actually have access to debt and you can use it as a way to cover your expenses.
Break down debt in the way that you're using it, because I feel like a lot of people hear debt and they immediately are like, oh my God, debt. But there's good debt.
Well, I don't even think of debt as like good debt or bad debt as versus like intentional debt and unclear, right? Like if you know you don't have the cash reserves to buy a car outright, then you leverage debt. You
Mhm.
intentionally take out an auto loan to get that car. If
Right.
you know that you don't currently have the cash in order to pay for school outright and your job doesn't cover the expenses, then you take out student loans and you pay for it. I
Mhm.
also say that if you know that you are struggling health-wise and it is unsustainable for you to be working a full-time job right now and you need to take part-time hours, then can you leverage a 0% credit card to
Mhm.
pay for those expenses covered while you take care of your health in
Mhm.
order to eventually get to a point where you can work full-time again?
Right.
So leveraging debt, I think, is just about being intentional and that you're aware every time that we leverage it, that we're also creating a debt payoff plan and knowing like,
Mhm.
okay, eventually I'm going to pay this off. Yes, level one, you can leverage that debt.
Mhm.
In order to increase or to move up in terms of the stages of financial security, I teach my clients that they need to be in this wealth building cycle. And the wealth building cycle consists of knowing your numbers, doing weekly financial check-ins where you know how much money you have in your checking account, how much you've charged to a credit card, seeing whether you could pay your credit cards off in full weekly.
Mhm.
Right? Are you putting money in savings? How are you saving not only for like unexpected emergency, but
Yeah.
also for planned upcoming expenses like travel? A lot of times, like people are like, will think like, oh, like, you just know what you're going to spend money on no matter what. For me, I always knew I
Mhm.
was going to spend money on my kids' birthday parties.
Mhm.
And even when I was like, oh, I want to like max out my Roth IRA, there was this time I was like, you know what? If instead of spending $1,000 on my kid's birthday party, then I could put it in a Roth IRA. Yeah, let me do that. Let me not. No, when it came to my kid's actual birthday, I still had the birthday party. And I knew in that moment, we always need to save for the things that we know we want to spend money on.
Mhm.
So knowing, saving for your sinking funds, right? That's knowing your numbers, being aware of that. The second part of the wealth building cycle is developing your financial literacy. There is so much information that if you're an immigrant or a child of immigrant, learning how to build wealth specifically in the United States takes a lot of intentionality. And
Mhm.
we're not taught this, like it's not mandated in schools for everybody to learn how to leverage debt, how to invest in the stock market,
Mhm.
how to create a budget, how to get life insurance. Like these are all things that you're gonna want to continue to develop your financial literacy.
Mhm.
Then focusing on increasing your income. I challenge people to work on increasing your income by at least 10% every single year.
Mhm.
Not 3%, which usually our employers will do just to keep up with inflation.
Mhm.
10%. Because just setting that intention and always thinking, oh, how can I increase my income? What are creative ways that I can monetize my skills without hustling, without burning out? It's a
Mhm.
skill. It's a skill, and it's so important that we're always thinking about how do we increase our extra cash flow. And
Mhm.
then the fourth part of the wealth building cycle is always evaluating your money thoughts and the beliefs and what you're telling yourself. And as you move up these stages of financial security, you'll find like thoughts that served you in the past aren't going to serve you and continue to serve you in the future. And you're
Mhm.
going to have to like shed them and outgrow them. For example, I remember growing up being told like, don't make so much money because if you make more money, you're just going to have to pay more in taxes. Like
Right.
literally, this is what I was told all the time. And
Right.
there came a point where my husband and I, we were gonna make about $300,000
Mhm.
together. And now we're like, oh my God, this is a lot of money. Like
Yeah.
maybe this is it. Maybe we don't need to keep making more money. Look at how much we're paying in taxes. And my husband was like, no, let's make more money. Let's pay the taxes. And now, I mean, last year we reported together combined income like around $750,000.
Mhm.
We've paid so much in taxes, but we've also been able to buy a house. We've also been
Mhm.
able to travel. There's so many other things, but I had to like let go of that belief. I also had beliefs regarding being a homeowner because I had grown up house poor and I was scared of that I had to let go. So evaluating your money thoughts and reflecting on what you're thinking about money is so important as you're in this wealth building cycle. So to recap those four things, okay?
Yeah.
You got to know your numbers, develop your financial literacy, increase your income, and always be aware of your money thoughts. In order to stay in this wealth building cycle, you have to be so intentional about your self-care.
Mhm.
Because if you're not, when you're not taking care of yourself, when you're out of your zone of resilience, you're not going to have the capacity to look at your numbers. You're not going to have the capacity to be like, oh, let me change my money thoughts. So it's so important that you learn how to engage in the 7 types of self-care.
Yeah, you just touched on a lot of different things that I think are super profound. One of which is sort of a good problem to have, but to your point, when you're when you feel like you actually feel the hit of the taxes, right? And I feel like there's a particular point, and it depends on where you live, but I feel like around that $200,000 mark, it's sometimes the most frustrating place to be because you're getting crushed on taxes, but you're not making enough where you're just really killing it. Especially I live in the New York, New Jersey area. It's very expensive. So, to me, once I began to start making a little bit more money and have a really good year, it was almost incredibly deflating and depressing about the fact that I still wasn't living the lifestyle that I wanted to because of things like taxes and all that. So I'm just curious how you sort of wrapped your brain around that time period and still were kind of working, I guess, through that and adjusting or recognizing, oh, I actually need to make X amount of money more to actually have the lifestyle I want.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I did the calculation, I was like, in order for us to buy a house, and if we stick to this budget when it comes to eating out, and this
Yeah.
budget when it comes to the kids' parties, all we need to make is $338,000, which
Right,
was
right.
so much, which
Yeah.
was so much because you have to understand that my last year in the classroom as a teacher, I was making around $68,000.
Yeah.
My husband was making about $80,000. So together we were like at 148, but we had 2 kids living in Los Angeles.
Yep.
So it's it's a lot like where you're at, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember I did that calculation. That calculation felt like it's impossible. How will I
Sure.
even make 6 figures? My husband was like, I could do it. He's a software engineer. He's taught himself how to code.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I think I could like job hop my way into making more money. And I was like, oh, like I felt like insecure. I felt so insecure that he was confident about increasing his income and that
Mm-hmm.
I felt so nervous about
Yeah.
how I was going to do it. Nevertheless, he starts making more money. We have to start paying more taxes. He was the one who was really upset about it. He was the
Yeah.
one who was like so frustrated.
Yep.
And in my mind, I was like, look at us. We actually made $338,000. How in the world? Like, yes, I put it on a vision board, but what?
Mm-hmm.
That really works. Like, it was so I was in this place of a lot of gratitude. And
Yeah.
he was in this place of a little bit of like frustration,
Mm-hmm.
resentment,
Yep.
and fear that
Mm-hmm.
it was never going to get easier.
That's I think you just nailed it. It's that thing of it's like how when they say like when it rains it pours almost, right? It's like the second you have an extra dollar in your pocket, you get hit with another bill or something bad happens. It is that same feeling like we're never going to get ahead and achieve this quote unquote American dream that we've been chasing.
Yeah. And that's where that he was at. I remember like we had made that amount of money, but we still couldn't afford to buy a house.
Right.
He was like, we're still renting, we're still in an apartment. We pay $4,700 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment in an area where our car got stolen. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
like he was had a lot of feelings about that. And I think part
Yeah.
of it is that I allowed him to have those feelings. He
Mm-hmm.
needed to process those emotions. It
Mm.
was okay for him to be upset, to feel frustrated, to feel fearful. There was
Right.
a time that I was like trying to push my gratitude onto him, and that
Mm-hmm.
just felt like I was gaslighting him. That's what he
Mm.
said to me. Like he just felt like, no, 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 no. I need
Yeah.
to have my emotions. And so really
Yeah.
allowing yourself to be like, yay, I'm proud of myself. Yay, it's gotten a little better. And this is still so hard because I'm a first gen wealth builder.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
Mm-hmm.
just have to like hold space for that and allow yourself to feel those feelings because they're valid. They're valid and it is frustrating and it could be anxiety inducing
Mm-hmm.
to feel like no matter what, I'm never going to get ahead. Now, another key part is to stop and reflect on how you're building your wealth. For
Mm.
me, I was very intentional as I worked on increasing my income to be very protective of my self-care routines. I was determined never to get as sick as I was when I was as a teacher ever
Mm-hmm.
again. Whereas my husband, he was sacrificing sleep. There
Mm-hmm.
was times he was sacrificing exercising. He was sacrificing hanging out with friends and he was putting work always ahead. And I think
Mm.
that's just a recipe for one, burnout, but two, also resentment.
Yeah.
You have to enjoy your journey to increasing your income and wealth building. If not, it's not sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's you can't hold on too tight to the vision you have in your head of what you want to create, I think, right? That's sort of what I've learned, especially as I've gotten older and your body doesn't recover the way that it used to, and it has far more demands than it did when you were in your 20s, right? And I've recognized how important the self-care part of it is, and also how you sometimes just can't will everything into existence at the exact moment you want it to. And oftentimes operating from a place of burnout, even if you're technically putting in the hours, they're not as they're not quality hours most of the time, right? They're not somebody who's operating from a creative and energized place. It's somebody who's sort of just getting by, and that's not really doing much for you in the long run, aside from being detrimental to your physical and mental health, which is going to produce the opposite effect of what you want, right? And I think that is I think a great sort of point to bring up as well. But I guess then we were talking about this balance between gratitude, but then realistically saying the budget we thought that was going to work, or the number that seems so crazy to us because of how we grew up, isn't actually that crazy in 2025 in the greater Los Angeles area, right? So how do you then find the balance between saying we need to readjust the plan, but still being grateful for the opportunities that you've gotten and the goals that you're checking off along the way?
Yeah. Well, a big thing was still focusing on increasing our income.
Mm-hmm.
That was huge. It was like, okay, so we still can't afford to buy a house, then let's focus on increasing our income again. Also, being intentional was like, as more money came our way, what ways could we use money as a tool to support our wellness, to nurture our joy, and what were the ways that we were going to nurture our wellness and our joy for free 99? And really like having like a low cost self-care toolbox. So as a parent, I know like, oh, like I told you in the beginning, right? Like we've overspent. So the next week, we got to like really come under. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking on the weekend, we're going to be going to the park. We're going to go to the library. We're going to clean the house. All those things, free 99. And it's going to just be like nicer for the home. So maybe the following week, maybe we can go eat out at a restaurant. Maybe we could do a little bit more. But really taking things week by week is helpful in terms of keeping some expenses low so that you can continue to build your cash reserves. Also, you want your money making money. So as we were saving to buy a home, we were putting, at one point, we had like over $250,000 in a high yield savings account. So the money in our high yield savings account every month was making $1,000 on interest. And so that I think was also very comforting, like looking at our different accounts, and not only the savings accounts, but also our investment accounts, and seeing how our money is making us money. That felt like, okay, it's not all on us. Like our money's working for us. If we can just be intentional about putting money aside, then our money can actually earn us money. And that felt a little like a little relieving.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's a little bit less on your shoulders in terms of like creating the money, right? I mean, so you're talked about budgeting. We've talked about trying to increase your income by 10% every year, right? And finding those little extra creative ways that you can do it. As you guys are trying to increase your money by 10%, are you doing anything else? Are you beginning to invest? I know you just mentioned obviously the savings account, but at what point do you feel comfortable enough to start getting a little bit aggressive and start taking some of these quote unquote risks of investing your money into places like the stock market?
Oh, that was pretty quick. For us, it was we built a checking account buffer. And this is also included in terms of like the 10 stages of financial security, right? So in stage 3 is that you can maintain a checking account buffer. And this is just money that you keep in your checking account that's either 5 to 25% of your monthly expenses. And you learn to have money in your checking account that you don't use. For us, we have a 25% checking account buffer. So for us, it's $2,500. So if I look at my account and I see $2,600, I'm like, oh, I only have $100 to spend until we get that. as somebody who grew up with the thing of el dinero se hizo para gastar, money is meant to be spent, that was something I had to learn. I had to learn to see money there and respect it of like, no, that's not spending money. That is peace of mind money.
Mm,
And valuing having money set aside to just protect my peace of mind. So that's 2,500 checking account buffer. Then we
mhm,
also built our emergency fund, sinking funds. We eliminated all of our high interest debt. And then we started focusing on maxing out our retirement accounts because again, we're working to become work optional and
mhm.
want to retire at an early age. So that means, and not everyone has to do that. Not everyone is
Sure.
going to, well, first of all, not everyone lives in a very high cost living area. So you
Mhm.
probably don't have to max out your retirement account. Your expenses aren't going to be as high. But for us, we live in California. We're trying to live in California forever. If it's not California, it's New York City. That's where my
Mhm.
husband's from. So it's like,
Yeah.
we gotta
Either
have
way, right?
it, no matter
Either
what.
either way, you gotta have the money.
And like I said, we have two kids.
Yeah.
So for us, it's like, okay, maxing out retirement accounts. And that was a shift for me because I had learned like, oh, you just contribute whatever your employer matches.
Mhm.
So my employer matched 3%. So I was always only investing 3%. And I don't think everyone knows that there is a maximum of how much you can contribute to a 401k or a
Mhm.
403b. And there's also the reality that there's a lot of us who don't even have access to employer retirement accounts. So
Mhm.
then we don't necessarily even know how to invest for retirement if our employer isn't giving us a retirement account, which
Right.
is why we have to develop our financial literacy.
Mhm.
So for us, we focused on, my husband had $0 invested for retirement at the age of 32.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we said before we went and bought a house is that we wanted to make sure that he had at least $100,000 invested for retirement,
Mm.
which maxing out his employer retirement account would mean like we just had to do that for 5 years. But even to get to the point where he could max out his retirement account, we had to increase our income. So you see how it's like
Mhm.
all interconnected, it's all
Yes.
very much related. And these are
Mhm.
the things that we just had to work on together. So for us, maxing out retirement accounts, I mean, that is that is a like a prerequisite to
Mm.
even spending more. And the reason why is because I like to travel now. You
Mhm.
best believe I'm going to want to travel when my kids are not in the house anymore.
Mhm.
I'm like retired. So that's why I think for me, investing for retirement is like, yeah, of course I'm going to prioritize that because I see it as a form of self-care. Future
Mhm.
me is going to want to spend on self-care too.
Right. 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 No, I love that. And I want to rewind to something you touched on the what would you call it, the emergency fund for your bills, specifically having an account for that. But then you mentioned you have another account for like emergencies. Is that what I heard?
Thinking funds, maybe?
What's
Thinking
yeah.
funds
Yeah,
is,
sinking funds.
yeah, it's for things that we know that we're going to spend money on. For
Mhm.
us, it's like our car repairs, kids'
Mhm.
birthday parties, school expenses,
Mhm.
traveling. Except this year, when we bought the house, we decided that instead of traveling as a family, the money that we would usually save, we're using it to like fix this house up. And
Mhm.
so it shifts, but we're always evaluating what are our sinking funds, what are the things that we know we're going to spend money on, and setting automatic transfers from our checking account to save for those things poco a poco.
I love that because I think a lot of people, the general thing you hear a lot is like the first one, having for percentages for saving just in case something shit hits the fan, essentially, right? Like with your bills and things like that. But being proactive and saying, I know that I'm probably going to get a flat tire down the road. I know that being a homeowner, something's going to happen, something's going to break, and I'm going to have to get a plumber in here to fix it, whatever, the toilet, the sink that I didn't expect. I like that sort of more proactive mindset as well. Is there a percentage that you put into that fund, or how do you kind of calculate what your automatic withdrawal is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it changes.
Yeah.
It depends on our savings goals and by when we need the money.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, like, we were saving to a 20% down payment for a house for five
Mm-hmm.
years. And I was able to afford an automatic transfer of $500 a month.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't how we saved the full money. It was being so intentional as money came our way, as we got bonuses. If I had a good year in business and I was able to pay myself more, right? Like as money came my way, we made sure to fill up our sinking funds first. So even like uh, right now, like in my mind, I'm like, we're short money. We're short money. And the reason why I'm saying we're short money is because we have sinking funds that are not full filled up. We're trying to convert our garage to a studio so that eventually we could rent it out. Okay. So we're working on saving money for that. We also have property taxes that we need to save for and a tax bill. These are sinking funds. And I'm like thinking about money that's going to be coming. And I'm like, oh, we don't have all that money in place. And I'm aware of that. And yet I do have like emergency fund savings. I have cash reserves that I could pull from other areas. But this is why I've been telling my husband, like, this is a year that we're going to increase our income again because buying a house came with a lot of expenses. Or if we don't want to increase our income, then we have to slow down on what we choose to do with our money and be more patient. And I think for me, it's easier to increase my income than be patient.
Sure. But I mean, to be fair though, you are displaying a lot of patience, even in the way you described sort of how you guys were saving for buying a house, right? I like the idea because I think we get this fixed goal in mind, right? Okay, I want to buy a house. So that's what we're working towards and we're saving towards it. And that's amazing. But we sort of forget all the other things that are going to come up along the way. Or I think to what you were talking about, sort of setting that thing of, okay, we got to max out the retirement fund though before we go in on the big time goal almost, right? And I think those little goals along the way to set yourself up that when you get the house, it's not going to be a burden, but instead it's actually going to be that joyous thing that you finally achieve that you're hoping for is kind of what I'm taking away from that.
100%. I mean, for us to buy a house, we save 20% for the down payment, 5% for closing costs, 3% maintenance fund. I had cash reserve, a furniture fund. So I knew I was going to want to buy new furniture for this house. So I saved $15,000. And my husband, who was so eager to get us out of living in an apartment, he was the one on Zillow finding houses and sending them my way. And I was like, we can't afford it yet. We don't have all this cash reserves. And then it was numbers. I was constantly looking at the numbers, and we did have to be patient there. And then there came to the point where he knew, like, he was like, so living in this neighborhood is rough on my nervous system. I want to live somewhere that I don't have to worry and like always be on high alert. And when he said that to me, I was like, all right, that's it. We're going to really, really focus on buying this house ASAP. Right. So we bought this house, which was an old house, 50-year-old house. It required fixing up, but we had the cash reserves set aside to do it. So it was like, okay, we could do it.
Yeah, you were able to do it with a peace of mind, right? I was the opposite. When I first bought my property, I basically just saved to get the down payment and get all the, expenses that came with closing to get that done. But then I basically panicked once I had the keys and I'm sitting in this empty house. I'm like, fuck, I just cleared out the majority of all of my money to make this happen. Now I can't even enjoy this. I'm walking around nervous about what is going to happen if I'm not able to, sort of replenish those funds as quickly as I need to. And thank God that I did. But that takes a toll on your nervous system for having those explosive moments of anxiety. And to be honest, it tainted the joy of buying my first property. I couldn't actually fully embrace it and enjoy it because I was living so anxious to the point of even like expenses for renting a U-Haul to bring things. I was so worried about everything at that point, right? And
real.
And that's just no way to live, I think, at the end of the day, right? And I think we've sort of like I don't know, I grew up for sure in like that mindset of like my parents would achieve these great things, but there was always a sense of panic around it as like I think we bit off more than we could chew. And if I could do it again, I would probably wait a little bit longer, or I would have prepared a year sooner, or whatever it was, because I know that it's not, your life is not meant to have these gigantic ups and downs as far as your emotional, your I don't know, just like the toll it takes. I can't really explain it in any other way other than that. And I think most of us operate in these moments of extreme highs and then extreme lows, and we don't recognize the idea you're probably supposed to be a little bit more balanced than we've been brought up or raised to see.
And you know what? I want to share this because I was somebody who had done, like, when we bought the house, we put 22% down just to
Mhm.
make sure that our mortgage was something that was going to still give us extra cash flow on a monthly
Yeah.
basis. I had, like I said, the moving costs of furniture, I had all this saved. We were able to do house repairs. We move into the house, and within 5 days of moving into the house, we had to evacuate due to wildfires in California.
Mm.
And so I share that story because the reality is that we can only each do our best.
Hmm.
For you, Dramos, with the information you had at that time, you did your best.
Right.
And we have to like be able to be like, okay, I did my best. I didn't have like, there's also things outside of our control. It was outside of your control that nobody had like sat you down when you were in high school, that you had like personal finance courses that they told
Hmm.
you like, oh, also save for this, also save for this. No, like we have to as well acknowledge that, right? Because we could be
Hmm.
so hard on ourselves,
Yeah.
and we could then like that like strictness or that judgment can cause us to then be very fearful. And the
Mm.
reality is like we're all doing our best. Let's learn a little bit more. Think about the aspects of the wealth building cycle. Continue to seek out information, but that even that is hard, right?
Hmm.
Because there's a version of me, I didn't know what a Roth IRA was. There's no way that I could have even Googled how to max out a Roth IRA because I didn't have that vocabulary.
Mm.
That's why, like, I'm so grateful for you using this platform to talk about personal finance, because people who are listening today, they're going to be thinking, oh, I never heard of sinking funds before. I never heard of a
Hmm.
checking account buffer. You're giving people access to words that then they can Google. And
Yeah.
we need that. And we all need to be talking dinero more. And I think that was another thing that like caused me to be so passionate about sharing my own financial journey, is because I was like, I just didn't know. If I had knew just a little bit more, but no one even wanted to talk dinero with me because it was considered like rude,
Right.
disrespectful, like, you know. But then
Hmm.
then we don't have the information we need, and we can't even Google it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, that's probably the biggest takeaway from all of the conversations I've been having this month is sort of breaking down the barriers just by having conversation, right? And when you begin to have the conversation, it piques curiosity, but also when you have the conversation amongst people who are from your community or and speak your language, so to speak, it seems less scary, right? And when something feels less scary, you're more inclined to be curious about it, and that curiosity then leads to education. And I think it's funny. I kind of you start this idea, this concept of building wealth and what are the keys and all these different complicated avenues that you can take for it. But I think in our conversation, as we kind of draw to a close, to me, the biggest takeaway and the biggest sort of key, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like mindset. More than anything, it's getting your mindset in order and correcting the thoughts that don't allow you to show up as the highest version of yourself, who is then seeking out the information and putting in the work. I kind of feel like that is bottom, ground level is getting your mind in order.
Yeah. And I think even to be able to get your mind in order, you have to be so in tune with your body,
Mm.
because sometimes like we're going to face resistance to letting go of beliefs because our body is like, it is not safe to
Mm.
think that it's okay to invest in the stock market. It is
Mm-hmm.
not safe to think that let me walk away from this job and get a higher paying job. Well, what if that higher paying job ends up being toxic? Like our
Right.
mind is always going to try to protect us from feeling unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is that we can get stuck in some familiarity. And just because something is familiar doesn't mean that it's safe. So
Mm-hmm.
recognizing when your body is saying like, oh, no, this is scary, don't do it. And learning to like calm your body down, learning to, ground yourself, taking deep breaths, going on a walk, understanding like, how do I take care of myself? So I could really see is like, oh, is this my body like just being on hyper alert because this is something
Mm-hmm.
so new? And if that's the case, like what information can I seek out to make my body feel a little bit more open to learning
Mm.
and find something new?
Yeah, I love that because That's probably one of the biggest practices I've adapted is in those moments I feel anxious or unsure of the next step. I just kind of do research, and I just blindly will go online and I'll watch random YouTube videos. I'll go back and forth with ChatGPT, and at the end of that process, I feel far more relaxed and okay with making a decision, or at times where I'm unsure about my path, when I just begin to sort of, if I write it out or again, talk it out with ChatGPT, it's just getting it out of the anxious thoughts out of my head. And then it makes room for the ones that actually have clarity, and that are actually far more instinctual rather than fear-based.
Right. And it's also important that we have people around us that are going to call us out on our fear-based thoughts. I can think about my times in my circle, people were reiterating my fear-based thoughts. And they were saying that it's so funny, but I didn't start a podcast for years. I just started one. But for years, because my mom was telling me, no, it's so dangerous. And then other people were saying, oh, it's so much work. And everyone was, those are thoughts that I already had about having a podcast, but hearing it from other people just forced those thoughts. And then finally I got to the point where you surround yourself with people who don't have those same fear-based thoughts, and you can start to think about it differently. It's so important that you have a community of people who, one, will talk dinero with you, but also who will talk dinero with you from a place of hope and possibility versus urgency and anxiety.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. There's a far more holistic approach to money than I think people realize, and that's sort of the healthier one rather than I feel like the finance bro that we sort of see all over social media. And I love that you're bringing light to that, and that's the work that you're doing. So if people want to work with you, I know you have Wealth Para Todos. It's a community. There's also, I think, one-on-one coaching, right? Where can people kind of get in contact and tap in if they want to know more about what you do?
Yes, I would love to hear from you. If you heard this podcast episode, send me a DM on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn and Threads. You can subscribe to my email list. I send out emails every Tuesday and Thursday. And I have a podcast. The podcast is called Wealth Para Todos, Financial Security Through Self-Care. That's currently on Apple and Spotify. I release episodes every Sunday. And if you want, after you learn more about me and you get a taste of my style, then you could also consider hiring me as your money and self-care coach. I work with clients one-on-one, and I also have a group membership program, and you can find out that at wealthparatodos.com. Everywhere, Wealth Para Todos. Okay.
Love it. I love it. And definitely check out the website. There's a lot of really, you did a great job of being very in-depth about what you do. And I think for anybody who's looking for that kind of help, you definitely check out the website and kind of get a feel for the work that Sol is doing. I think it's absolutely incredible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. And thank you so much for hopping on. We really do appreciate the conversation. And thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you for having me. And if y'all have questions, you reach out. Do not be a stranger. The more of us talking dinero, the better.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Sol from Wealth Para Todos. I think I kind of summarized at the end. We're gonna do conclusions too, because I'm gonna end up ruining conclusions too. Let's touch on all that we talked about today and tie it in a neat little bow in the segment we call conclusions too. Time for conclusions too. All right, so I think the biggest takeaway, and it's ironic that it felt like it just hit me in the moment. It's funny or ironic more than anything that it's groundbreaking to me. But I sort of as much as I was trying to approach this month and all of these episodes and these conversations from a different perspective, I also went into this conversation this is going to be the blueprint to building wealth for Latinos, right? And I think it was. But more than practical advice, and we got a lot of it in this conversation, the biggest thing for me is ironically, I keep using that fucking word redundantly at this point, but it's your mindset. And again, I feel stupid even saying that out loud because it's kind of a yeah, duh. But I feel like we don't recognize it, or we don't prioritize it, or really we don't look at it as something, of substance or extreme importance as it should be, right? Number one, more than anything else is getting your mind in order. You can't do anything without your mental being in order, right? I think even having the best financial plan in place and, I'm going to take a percentage of this and put it into savings, into this, into that, it means nothing if your mind is not in the right place. Because if your mind is not in tune with yourself, or your mind is operating from a place of trauma, or is still operating in a place of self-doubt and an identity crisis, you're not going to stick to those plans in the long run. Your mind will find a way to sabotage, to self-sabotage with old programming, right? And it will listen to those naysayers, and it will listen to the doubting voice that you have in your head, that we all have. And you have to address that. And I don't know, even simple things like we talked about in this conversation, the idea of like taking it easy on yourself, as simple and dumb as that sounds out loud, it's something many of us don't regularly practice, right? I've beat the shit out of myself mentally so many times when I didn't reach my financial goals, right? When I, ate out more than I planned on for that week. And I've made myself feel bad about it, right? And, or I've deprived myself of the things that I enjoy because I told myself I don't deserve them right now because I'm not where I want to be financially, right? And I've gone through the spectrum of that throughout the years, or, sort of having those woe is me moments, like I'll never get ahead no matter how hard I work, no matter, how much I increase my income. There's always something happening, right? And it's these thoughts that you end up, beating yourself to a point that you defeat yourself, or you end up halting your progress only to have to start all over again. And I think if I could take away anything from this month, and we're not, I'm going to do a solo episode next week to kind of round everything out, but it really, you have to do that inner work. I think it's so crucial to any aspect of our lives, from our finances to our personal relationships. Like, none of it will be as in sync or bring us as much fulfillment as we need it to, or as we want it to, if we don't have our mental in order. It's so incredibly important. And again, I feel like that sounds ridiculous or redundant, or again, just obvious, but we say it's obvious, and then we go and do the complete opposite of what's actually healthy for us, or what actually will put us in the best position to win. And like a small anecdote from that, I shared how I've gone through phases where I'm like, dude, I got to cut out eating out so much, like Uber Eats, and I'm ordering 2 meals, a day from there. And like, you do the math, and it's like, I just paid $15 extra per meal for no reason, just because I didn't cook something, or just because I didn't get in the car and go pick it up myself. And I would use the excuse as like, oh, I'm busy, which I am, and all these things. And then it would just be this cycle of like shame of like, you're not taking care of yourself, or you're not, you're going over budget, you're not reaching your financial goals, you're wasting money, you're throwing money, like this whole cycle of shame around these little things. And then when I would be good at it, right, when I would be like, hey, we're going food shopping, we're going to cook every meal, we're going to prep, I would do all those things. But then I would be upset or depressed because I'm like, really, I want to just go and grab some pasta from the Italian place that I like down the road. Like, I'm craving that. It don't hit the same when I make it, And it's like you had this week where you just worked your ass off in every aspect, and you want this one little release, but then you feel guilty about it. And that guilt leads to you being depressed about the fact that you're not a fucking billionaire who doesn't have to think about these things, right? And that's like, I guess a small little anecdote, but that's something that could bleed into every aspect of your life, right? And that will halt or slow down potential progress because you're operating from this place of just being miserable with life, and being upset with life and the hand that you've been dealt, And it's easy to then get into a sort of woe is me stage where you are really defeating yourself at the end of the day, and you're not as energized and you're not as excited to get after the day as you would have been if you had a bit more of balance in terms of working for your future, but also allowing yourself to have the pleasantries of life. And again, these are simple, seemingly obvious things that so many of us don't practice in real time. Her talking about budgeting in the, restaurant meal that she wants to have once a week is so obvious, but why the fuck didn't I think of that, right? Why is that like a, oh my God type of thing to me, right? Why is that so profound? And again, it's often these simple little things that make the world of difference. And I know that for me, in the moments and the phases of my weeks, my days, my weeks, my months, my years, the moments where I'm operating from a place of excitement about life, and it doesn't have to just be career opportunity, it doesn't have to be relationships, it doesn't have to be any of those things. If I'm just like, oh man, like life is good, life just feels good. The more I operate from that mental place, the better I am in my career, the more creative I am, the better I'm showing up for my relationships, the more fun I'm having just experiencing this thing called life. And that's why having a plan for wealth and finances and career are meaningless if you don't have the mental plan to go with it, if you don't have the positive thoughts to go with it, if you aren't doing the work on yourself internally to go along with the tangible real world things that you're doing to accumulate wealth. Again, you can have $1 million sitting in the bank and be completely miserable, right? If you're not in touch with what's going on internally. And I think that's sort of the bigger takeaway of it all. And obviously, I loved her talking about these plans for the future, I think in a practical way. That is something we need to get better at, myself included. And I also think the other thing is she had the bigger idea and the bigger goal of purchasing the house, but she also didn't allow it to blind her to what does she need to do to purchase the house and not be in a position of constant anxiety, right? Being house rich but money poor type of mindset. And I love that, and that's something I wish I had learned. And I kind of got a little emotional when she sort of broke down for me and almost consoled me at saying, like, but you did the best of what you had with the information you had at the time. And that like felt like a relief. That felt good to hear somebody sort of say that. And because again, I'm beating myself up in the conversations about, what I did or cheapening the moment, because I'm thinking about how difficult it was once I got the property, And again, that all starts with your mental health and your mental wealth, if you will, right? And I think I'm talking in circles a bit, but yeah, I think, in a lot of these conversations, in all of them, as I kind of reflect on these last 4 weeks in general, it all really circles back to the secret sauce is like your mental state. You get that in order, the world opens itself up for you. And obviously that's an ongoing process. It never ends. But you get to a good and healthy relationship with yourself internally, life really begins to open itself up. And that's, I think, the journey I've been on this last year or so, is getting back to that point of like, life is fun again, right? Not just white knuckling it, not working towards the goals and sacrificing all the enjoyment, but like getting back to a place of enjoying the process, having gratitude, and just leaving myself open to all the joy that life has to offer, even if it's not monetarily in the moment, monetarily beneficial. Because I believe the joy it brings me will eventually lead me down that route. But even if in the moment it's not monetarily enjoyable, I understand that there's a benefit to it. And I guess that's where I'll leave it. When it comes to this conversation today, I think I just love, again, it's like preparing for the future and becoming financially savvy and building wealth, but doing it from a place of self-care. And I think that's just a beautiful idea and goal to have in mind. So again, big shout out to our guest today, Soledad from Wealth Para Todos. Go check her out. The website, again, has a lot of information with her coaching, her podcast, and all that stuff. Go check everything out. I think she has an email list on there as well. I found it to be super helpful, and I really love the mission that she's on. So big shout out to her. With that said, I'll catch y'all on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. Till then, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Peace.